football legend is accused of double murder.
The Los Angeles Police Department is searching for Mr. Simpson.
O.J. sitting there with a gun pointed at his own head.
It's a Hollywood media circus.
It just was completely hypnotizing for month after month.
If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
The case reveals racial divides that remain unhealed more than a decade later.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of murder.
We had completely different opinions as to what the outcome should be.
The questions. The answers. The story behind the O.J. Simpson trial. Next on The Final Report. Los Angeles, June 13th, 1994, 12:45 a.m. Sirens pierce the air in the affluent neighborhood of Brentwood. A handful of police officers search a home at 875 South Bundy Drive. Two bodies lie near the entrance of this modest condominium building. The female victim is 35-year-old Nicole Brown Simpson, ex-wife of football legend and media personality O.J. Simpson. The male victim is later identified as 25-year-old Ronald Goldman. Police find crucial pieces of evidence. Shoe prints, a trail of blood leaving the scene, a blue knit cap, and a blood-stained glove. The amount of evidence raises the first question to be investigated and answered by the final report. What does the crime scene indicate about the killings? 4:05 a.m. LAPD homicide detective Philip Van Atter arrives.
Anybody that had any connection with these victims is a potential suspect. Anybody. So obviously Simpson at that point was a potential suspect.
5 a.m. Van Atter, his partner Tom Lang, along with detectives Ronald Phillips and Mark Furman, drive to O.J. Simpson's estate, 2 miles away on Rockingham Avenue. They want to inform Simpson of his ex-wife's death before the media learns of the story. At Simpson's home, the detectives buzz the intercom at the front gate. No one answers.
We saw lights on in the house. There were cars in the driveway. It looked like someone was home.
While he waits, 42-year-old Detective Furman notices a white Ford Bronco parked on the street outside the estate. He runs the license plate and verifies that the Bronco belongs to Simpson. Furman spots what he thinks is blood near the handle on the driver's side door. 45 minutes have passed, and no one has answered the intercom. Van Atter tells Furman to jump over the wall that surrounds the estate, to open the front gate for the other detectives. Why do police enter the premises before speaking with O.J. Simpson? Shortly before 6 a.m., Simpson's 25-year-old daughter Arnell, who lives in a guest house on the estate, answers a knock at her door. She helps the detectives get in touch with her father. Just hours earlier, he flew to Chicago to appear at a golf tournament. Detective Phillips calls the hotel and asks to be put through to Simpson's room. Phillips tells him about his ex-wife's death. Simpson says he will take the next flight back to Los Angeles. About 15 minutes later, Furman tells Van Atter he's found something interesting in a narrow walkway on the inside perimeter of the estate.
Furman comes to me and says, "You'll never believe what I found. Come on, I'll show you." And he shows me the glove.
The bloody glove is strikingly similar to the one Van Atter saw at the crime scene a couple of hours ago. Then he makes another discovery.
I was standing in the driveway there, and I look down and I see a blood drop.
Van Atter sees a trail of red spots dotting the pavement. He declares the estate a crime scene. 7:10 a.m. LAPD criminalist Dr. Dennis Fung begins collecting samples of blood evidence at Simpson's estate. 12:10 p.m. Simpson arrives at his Brentwood home from his trip to Chicago. Police are waiting for him. Simpson agrees to an interview at the LAPD headquarters. The session is tape recorded. Simpson tells detectives the last time he saw his ex-wife was on the night of the murders, at their 9-year-old daughter's dance recital, shown here on this home video.
What time was that yesterday?
I ended about 6:30, 6:45, you know, something like that.
The detectives gently question Simpson about the rest of the evening.
So what time do you think you got back home? Actually, physically got home?
Something.
And then you left and...
You know, I'm trying to think that I leave.
Simpson gives a vague account of his whereabouts from the time he returned from the recital to his departure for the airport to catch an 11:45 p.m. flight to Chicago. Why don't the detectives press Simpson for more definitive answers? 2:07 p.m. After 32 minutes of questioning, the interview ends. Simpson voluntarily provides a blood sample before leaving. LAPD criminalists compare blood evidence collected at the crime scene against the sample Simpson gave police. June 15th, DNA tests confirm that drops of Simpson's blood are at the murder scene. Also, a mixture of his and both victims' blood is on the glove that was found at his estate. O.J. Simpson is now the LAPD's prime suspect. June 17th, 8:30 a.m., the day after Nicole's funeral. Police contact Simpson's attorney, Robert Shapiro. They tell him they have a warrant for his client's arrest. Shapiro asks that Simpson be allowed to surrender at 11 a.m. Why don't police arrest Simpson immediately? Simpson fails to show. Just before 2 p.m., police announce that Simpson is a fugitive.
The Los Angeles Police Department right now is actively searching for Mr. Simpson.
3 hours later, Simpson's friend Robert Kardashian goes on television and reads what sounds like a suicide note from Simpson.
I can't go on. No matter what the outcome, people will look and point. I can't take that.
6:35 p.m. Orange County Sheriff's Deputy Larry Poole spots a white Bronco heading north on the Santa Ana Freeway. Al Cowlings, Simpson's friend and a former Buffalo Bills teammate, is at the wheel. Cowlings stops his Bronco in the middle of the highway. Officer Poole approaches with his gun drawn. Cowlings begins yelling out the window.
He wanted to convey to us that he had O.J. in the car, that he's in the back and he has a gun to his head.
Then Cowlings speeds away. Just after 7 p.m., networks break into programming, including an NBA Finals game, to broadcast live images of the chase. Nearly 95 million Americans tune in. 7:26 p.m. Detective Tom Lang reaches Simpson on his cell phone. He tries to convince him to get rid of the gun.
Just throw it out the window. And nobody's going to get hurt.
I'm the only one that deserves.
No, you don't deserve that.
Get hurt.
You do not deserve to get hurt. You do not deserve to get hurt.
See all the police cars behind.
Cowlings drives at 40 miles per hour north on Interstate 405. He appears to be heading to Simpson's Brentwood home. KNBC TV reporter Conan Nolan covers the pursuit from a news van on the interstate.
It was the most chaotic, bizarre, surrealistic scene I had ever witnessed in Southern California. People had assembled on the overpasses. I'm not sure how it's possible, but there were people who had made signs. Signs. How did they have time to do this?
The crowd cheers on the Juice, a nickname from his football days that plays off Simpson's initials. Why is Simpson receiving such a strong show of support? After a 60-mile chase, Cowlings exits Interstate 405 and makes his way to Simpson's estate. News choppers swarm overhead. 8:53 p.m. Simpson finally surrenders. He is given a glass of orange juice to drink while he phones his mother. 10:20 p.m. Simpson is taken to the LA County Jail and placed on suicide watch. Police arrest Al Cowlings for aiding and abetting a fugitive. They find nearly $9,000 in cash in his pockets. In the Bronco, they find Simpson's passport, a change of underwear, and a fake mustache and beard. The evidence mounts in the case against O.J. Simpson. A so-called dream team will come to his rescue. And later, the answers to our questions on the final report. June 1994, Los Angeles. 46-year-old O.J. Simpson sits in a jail cell, accused of murdering his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend, Ronald Goldman. Simpson's lead defense attorney, Robert Shapiro, assembles what the press dubs the Dream Team. F. Lee Bailey, a famed attorney with experience trying murder cases. 2 DNA trial experts, Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld, and renowned Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz, an expert in appellate law.
The average person doesn't get a team like this, obviously. O.J. Simpson had money, he had fame, he had many, many lawyers.
Among the attorneys Shapiro hires is law professor Gerald Ullman. He says the Dream Team was anxious to get the case before a jury.
Pushing the case to trial quickly was the most important tactical move.
This raises another question to be answered by the final report. Why is the defense in such a hurry? Facing down the Dream Team is a group of prosecutors from the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office, led by Marcia Clark. 1,000 reporters from radio, television, and newspapers seize on every aspect of the story, from the attorneys to the victims to the accused himself.
Celebrity, race, privilege, all that came into play. The man who was on trial was a person that millions of people had watched for years and loved.
June 22nd, 5 days after O.J. Simpson's arrest. In response to media requests, the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office releases the recording of a 911 call Nicole Brown Simpson made to police a year earlier.
He's back. Please. Okay, what does he look like? He's O.J. Simpson. I think you know his record. He just drove up. He did. He just drove me over. Okay, wait a minute.
July 18th. Simpson adds yet another attorney to the team. Johnny Cochran has defended celebrity clients like Michael Jackson. 7 days later, on July 25th, the New Yorker magazine runs a story by Jeffrey Toobin. Toobin reveals the defense team's strategy to persuade the jury that a racist LAPD detective planted evidence to frame Simpson. Acting on a tip, Toobin found court records showing Detective Mark Fuhrman sued the city of LA in the early 1980s. He sought a disability pension. Fuhrman claimed he was dangerously unbalanced due to the stress of police work and made racist statements during his psychiatric evaluations.
I found statements he had made talking about niggers and whatnot, and I thought, wow, this is pretty inflammatory stuff.
But the city ruled that Fuhrman was exaggerating his problems. He remained on the force. Toobin then sought out Robert Shapiro. Shapiro told Toobin the defense team knew about Fuhrman's case against the city. And he outlined the defense team's conspiracy theory.
He said, we think Fuhrman planted the glove at O.J.'s house. And now I knew I had a real story. It becomes a racial drama in L.A. with its history of racial problems.
Why does the defense want to bring race front and center in the trial? August 19th. To prepare for jury selection, the prosecution team's jury expert, Dr. Donald Vinson, asked mock jurors how they feel about key players in the case. His findings: black women are more sympathetic to Simpson than to his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson. Black mock jurors describe Robert Shapiro as smart and call Marcia Clark, quote, a bitch. The jury consultant gave prosecutor William Hodgman and his team advice.
Dr. Vinson advocated try not to have black jurors on the panel. This was shortly after the Rodney King trial, and we knew that for many black jurors in Los Angeles, there was a bad feeling towards LAPD.
But prosecutors don't follow Vincent's suggestions. Why do they ignore their own jury consultant's data? At the same time, the defense predicts that the prosecution will focus on Simpson's history of domestic abuse and try to stack the jury with women. Which side will benefit from having women on the jury? As the defense prepares for jury selection, their consultant, Richard Gabriel, asks his own panel of mock jurors for their impressions of the LAPD. He finds those who had negative experiences with police are more sympathetic to Simpson, and those with negative experiences tend to be black.
African Americans that we interviewed in that jury pool had a much more skeptical view about how the Los Angeles Police Department gathered evidence, how they jumped to conclusions.
December 8th, the court announces 12 jurors. The final panel includes 1 black man, 1 Hispanic man, 2 white women, and 8 black women. During jury selection, 5 members of the final panel cited negative experiences with police, and 5 thought using force on a family member was acceptable. January 24th. 7 months after his arrest, the trial of O.J. Simpson begins. It's rare that a murder case of this magnitude gets to trial this quickly. Reporters from more than 100 news outlets descend on the courthouse to cover the trial. Inside the courtroom, a single camera captures the proceedings and provides live coverage on 3 cable networks. The Simpson jurors won't have access to any of the media coverage. They will be sequestered for the duration of the trial.
To let her go would mean to lose control of her.
In the first part of the prosecution's opening statement, Deputy District Attorney Christopher Darden portrays Simpson as a wife-beater who spiraled out of control.
And the evidence will show that the face you'll see will be the face of a batterer, an abuser, a controller. You'll see the face of Ron's and Nicole's murderer.
Why does the prosecution lead with domestic violence? Then, Darden's colleague, Marcia Clark, delivers her opening remarks. She reviews DNA results that prove each of the blood drops leaving the murder scene was Simpson's.
Matches the defendant. Matches the defendant. Matches the defendant.
January 25th. Johnny Cochran delivers the defense team's opening statement. For 2 days, he rebuts the prosecution and tells the jury the DNA evidence can't be trusted.
If the evidence was contaminated at the scene or mishandled by the Los Angeles Police Department, the results will not be reliable.
Over the next 23 weeks, the prosecution builds its case against Simpson. Racial epithets, whether the bloody gloves fit, and the answers to our questions are next, when the final report continues. March 9th, 1995. LAPD detective Mark Furman takes the witness stand in the O.J. Simpson murder trial. Lead prosecutor Marcia Clark is certain the defense will portray Furman as a racist cop who planted evidence. Knowing that, why does the prosecution put Furman on the stand?
Correct. Exactly what we just said.
For 3 days, Clark establishes that police found critical evidence at Nicole Brown Simpson's house before Furman arrived.
Had the glove and the cap underneath the bush already been pointed out to you?
Yes.
Then, she asked Furman about the glove he found at Simpson's estate.
How close did you get to it?
I didn't touch it. I looked at it. I didn't know what the significance of it was.
March 15th. Defense attorney F. Lee Bailey cross-examines Mark Furman. He zeroes in on whether the detective has made racial slurs.
You say on your oath that you have not addressed any black person as a nigger or spoken about black people as niggers in the past 10 years, Detective Furman.
That's what I'm saying, sir.
April 3rd. LAPD criminalist Dennis Fung takes the stand. It is his first of 9 days of testimony. Defense attorney Barry Scheck focuses on lax LAPD evidence collection methods that could have led to inaccurate DNA test results.
It was a terrible mistake to put this blanket from inside the house into the crime scene. That could be a source of contamination. There is no rule at LAPD that gloves should be changed between each sample.
No.
And you did not change gloves between the collection of each sample, did you?
Not that I can recall, no.
June 15th. Prosecutor Christopher Darden makes a dramatic request.
The people would ask that Mr. Simpson step forward and try on the glove recovered at Bundy as well as the glove recovered at Rockingham.
Darden does this against the advice of fellow prosecutor Marcia Clark. He doesn't know how the demonstration will play out. Neither glove appears to fit.
It was just an obviously terrible idea to let the defendant control whether the gloves fit or not. It was so bad, it was almost silly.
Darden later said he, quote, ached with regret for what the glove incident might have done to the case. July 6th. After presenting 488 exhibits and 58 witnesses, the prosecution rests.
Had you seen anything?
There is no mention of the Bronco chase, the passport, or disguises found in the vehicle after Simpson's arrest. Why isn't evidence from the Bronco chase presented in court? The next day, Saturday, July 7th, the defense team receives an anonymous tip about a series of audio tapes in which Detective Mark Furman repeatedly makes racist remarks. The tapes belong to Laura Hart McKinney, a screenwriter who interviewed Furman over the course of several years. The defense wants to play the tapes in court. September 5th.
Relevance?
After a long battle over admissibility of the tapes, Judge Lancito allows the jury to hear 2 short snippets.
They don't do anything. They don't go out and
Furman is caught in an outright lie. Race was so much at the heart of this case. So that was devastating to the prosecution.
September 26th. Closing arguments begin. Prosecutor Christopher Darden contends that DNA evidence and Simpson's history of domestic violence prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, the standard required for conviction in any criminal case.
It is because he hit her in the past, because he's kicked her and punched her and grabbed her around the neck.
September 27th.
It wasn't necessary.
Johnny Cochran delivers the defense team's closing statement. He sums up the glove demonstration.
If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
Then he tells the jury that the police conspired to frame Simpson.
That's what I'm asking you to do. Stop this cover-up. Stop this cover-up. If you don't stop it, then who?
All of this plays out on live television. Coverage has drawn an average of more than 2 million viewers a day. But have the jury and television viewers seen the same trial? October 2nd, 9 a.m. After an 8-month trial and testimony from 150 witnesses, the jury begins deliberations. Less than 4 hours later, they have a verdict. Judge Lancito announces that it won't be revealed until the next morning. October 3rd, 10 a.m. An estimated 150 million viewers tune into live coverage, and a crowd of more than 1,000 people gather outside the courthouse.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder upon Nicole Brown Simpson. We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty of the crime of murder upon Ronald Lyle Goldman.
KNBC reporter Conan Nolan is standing outside the courthouse.
A huge roar went up. If O.J. Simpson were outside, maybe he could hear it in the courtroom. It might sound a little like his days back at USC, with 100,000 people at the Los Angeles Coliseum cheering a touchdown for him.
Cameras show black audiences cheering, while white audiences are visibly upset. What do the images reveal? More than a decade after O.J. Simpson's acquittal, provocative questions remain about the trial, the evidence, and whether justice prevailed. The final report now answers those questions, beginning with the night of the murders, when police swarmed the bloody crime scene. What did the crime scene indicate about the killings? Authorities say it showed that Ronald Goldman interrupted the murder of Nicole Brown Simpson.
When you have someone that walks in, it throws off your plans totally. And that's why we have a knit cap, that's why we have a glove, that's why we have all that blood.
LAPD forensic labs concluded that Simpson's blood was found at the crime scene, in his Bronco, and at his estate. During the trial, the defense zeroed in on LAPD evidence collection methods that they claimed could have caused DNA tests to be invalid.
No doubt about it.
Peter Aranella is a UCLA law professor who served as a legal commentator for ABC News during the trial. He says the defense strategy succeeded in undercutting the government's best evidence.
What they had to do with that evidence is confuse the jury as best they could, to show the jury that mistakes were made, and then to leap on those mistakes and to generate the theme of not only corruption, planting of evidence, but absolute incompetence.
On the night of the murders, Van Adder and 3 other detectives surveyed the crime scene and went to Simpson's home to notify him of his ex-wife's death. There, Mark Furman scaled the fence and later announced he'd found the bloody glove. Why did police enter the premises before speaking with Simpson? Detectives say they were concerned it might be another crime scene. When Furman found a blood stain on the Bronco outside the estate, detectives became alarmed. Furman jumped the fence to let the detectives in to investigate.
We don't know whether we have someone injured or killed there, whether we have someone being held hostage there. We don't know what's going on.
Defense attorneys, however, say this was nothing more than an illegal search.
They were looking for evidence, and they did not have a search warrant. This story they cooked up about going there to look for other victims was a cock and bull story.
The next day, June 13th, 12:10 p.m. When Simpson returned home from his trip to Chicago, he willingly went to police headquarters to answer some questions. During the interview, Simpson provided only vague information.
How did you get the injury on your hand?
I don't know. Well, not the first time. I know when I was in Chicago, I know how, but at the house I was just running around.
Why didn't the detectives press Simpson for more definitive answers? They wanted to keep Simpson cooperative.
We knew we had to get blood. We knew we had to get fingerprints. We didn't want to anger him because he could have looked at us and said, "To hell with you, I'm not talking to you anymore, I'm leaving."
But critics say the detectives were so deferential during the interview that prosecutors dubbed it the fiasco and decided not to introduce it at trial.
That was the real outrage of this investigation, that he was treated with kid gloves, not that he was treated like some sort of thug.
The prosecution claimed to have a mountain of evidence against Simpson. Why they chose not to tell the jury about some of the most intriguing items and more answers to our questions when the final report continues. June 17th, 1994. The O.J. Simpson case took a dramatic turn. Simpson was supposed to turn himself in to the LAPD at 11 a.m. When he didn't, police announced he was a fugitive.
Right now.
Why hadn't police immediately arrested him? Police didn't think he was a flight risk. After police called Simpson in Chicago the morning of the murders, he voluntarily returned to Los Angeles, talked to detectives, and provided a blood sample. Police believe Simpson would continue to be cooperative. Deputy District Attorney William Hodgman says the decision not to arrest Simpson immediately may have been a mistake.
Generally, we don't allow our suspects to surrender, so that was a special consideration in O.J.'s case.
O.J. Simpson volunteered for fundraisers for the LAPD, for the police department union. So all indications are that they loved him, and they gave him every break imaginable.
The unusual way in which police treated Simpson led to one of the most watched moments in television history.
Okay, you're looking at a live picture right now where we think O.J. Simpson.
At 7 p.m., television stations began broadcasting images of the Bronco chase. Simpson was inside, with his friend Al Cowlings at the wheel. Along the way, crowds followed the Bronco and waved signs from overpasses. Many cheered his flight. Why did Simpson receive such a strong show of support? Simpson had a unique relationship with the public. He had successfully made the leap from football star
O.J. Simpson bursting off tackle
to TV pitchman.
Hurts knows to keep your business.
Simpson's appeal had transcended cultural and racial lines. UCLA law professor Kimberly Williams Crenshaw says the public regarded Simpson as race neutral.
He's always the one who was seen as having crossed over, the one that was embraced, the one who could be accepted because, hey, you know, even though he's black, he is just like the guy next door.
He was considered whatever group he was appealing to at that time. Asians didn't see him as African American, nor did whites, nor did Hispanics. He was O.J. Simpson.
But as much as Simpson was accepted by various racial groups, his relationship with the black community was tenuous.
O.J. had distanced himself pretty significantly from the African American community during the Civil Rights Movement. When other players were speaking out, raising their clenched fist salute, O.J. was noticeably quiet.
On June 17, 1994, Simpson was charged with 2 counts of murder. He had the right to a speedy trial, defined in California as beginning 60 days after being arraigned. Most defendants waived that right to allow their legal team ample time to prepare for trial. Simpson's team made sure it had the resources to proceed quickly. Why was the defense in such a hurry? They wanted to limit the evidence the prosecution would have against Simpson.
Given the length of time it took to utilize the most discriminating DNA analysis, there was a good possibility we could not even get all of our blood evidence analyzed by the time we went to trial.
While the prosecution raced to get all of its evidence tested, their jury consultant, Donald Vinson, prepared by questioning the beliefs of mock jurors. He found that African American jurors, especially black females, were sympathetic to Simpson. Why did prosecutors ignore their jury consultant's data? Marcia Clark felt she had always been able to build a rapport with black female jurors. From her courtroom experience, Clark knew that female jurors sometimes view victims of domestic violence with disdain. But Clark was confident she could persuade them to be sympathetic to the abuse Nicole Brown Simpson endured. Which side benefited from having women on the jury? Female jurors sided with the defense. After the trial, one juror said the panel did not believe the prosecution's theory about domestic violence. Another juror said she didn't think the evidence amounted to much.
No one's saying that we applaud domestic violence, but we just didn't feel that domestic violence was the motive of this case.
You know, I kept hearing this term about a mountain of evidence. Well, to me, it was a molehill.
When the trial opened on January 24, 1995, prosecutors began their case with evidence of domestic violence. Why did they lead with this evidence? To try to sway females on the panel and to remove any presumption of innocence because of Simpson's celebrity status.
This was a saga of domestic violence which culminated in a murder. And we led with several weeks of domestic violence evidence, testimony, photos, in an effort to try to knock Simpson off the pedestal.
Harvard Law professor Charles Ogletree, who was a legal commentator during the trial, tells the final report that this strategy was a mistake.
They thought, well, we've got all these women on the jury. If we just mention the issue of battering, they will buy that. The assumption about what this meant in the context of a double murder undermined the case in a serious way.
But have the jury and television viewers seen the same trial? No. Viewers saw and heard much more about the case. Defense attorney Gerald Ullman tells the final report that difference helps explain the public's reaction to the not guilty verdict.
The public saw a lot of things that the jury didn't see, stuff that wouldn't even be admissible in evidence.
Viewers, for example, learned about the contents of Nicole Brown Simpson's diary, which detailed Simpson's abuse. Jurors never heard about the diary because it was ruled hearsay. People who followed the trial by tuning into news coverage only saw an edited version of the day's proceedings.
People didn't sit and watch 6 to 7 hours of the coverage. They watched CNN, they watched the nightly news, and what were they getting there? They were getting pundits. People spinning what happened in the courtroom. It was entertainment.
Other evidence not presented in court was from the infamous white Bronco chase along the Los Angeles freeways.
So I look ahead, I can see people in the road now.
Why wasn't evidence from the chase presented in court? The prosecution believed it would have helped the defense. If evidence police found in the Bronco after the chase had been introduced in court, so could the taped phone calls police made to a suicidal Simpson in the Bronco.
No, don't.
With Nicole, that's all I'm gonna do. That's all I'm trying to do.
Think about everybody else, all right?
I couldn't do it on a freeway. I couldn't do it in a field. I want to do it at her grave. I want to do it at my house.
Frankly, I think the conversation would have been likely to engender some feeling of sympathy towards Simpson.
The state's case also will be undermined by one of its own witnesses.
I didn't touch it. No.
Not guilty of the crime of murder.
The verdict and the fallout are next in the conclusion of the final report. Spring 1995. The LA prosecutor's case in the O.J. Simpson murder trial suffered a setback when one of its key witnesses perjured himself. Detective Mark Furman's testimony about his use of racist language was discredited when the defense played audio tapes in court of his racist remarks. Why did prosecutors put Mark Furman on the stand? They believed there would be a gaping hole in their theory of the case if he didn't testify.
Furman was the initial finder of the bloody glove at Rockingham, so his testimony was essential, and we did not feel a need to hide from his history in order to present his testimony.
But after the trial, jurors said once they learned Furman had lied on the stand, they dismissed the rest of his testimony during deliberation.
Actually, we didn't touch on Furman that much. He's not credible. I couldn't believe anything he would say.
After less than 4 hours of deliberation, on October 3rd, 1995, the verdict was announced.
Not guilty of the crime of murder.
Not guilty. Since that day, scenes of Americans reacting to the verdict have become iconic television imagery. What did the images reveal? In part, the reactions reflected racial beliefs about the American justice system.
Arguments about police planting evidence are going to be less well received by a white suburban community that never has had experience, except good ones, with the police than will African Americans in urban areas who have had very different experience with the police as what many have called an occupying army.
Immediately after the verdict, polls translated this divide into stark numbers. According to a CBS News poll, 75% of whites surveyed believe Simpson was guilty. On the other hand, 78% of blacks polled believed he was innocent. Shante Morgan, a former reporter for Copley News Service who covered the Simpson case, says the black community cheered because this time the justice system worked to the benefit of a black man.
I think that his victory symbolized that for once we won using the same judicial system that had been used to send so many other African American men to jail unfairly and unjustly.
Others believe the cheers were for Johnny Cochran.
If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
Seeing African Americans in this arena performing at that level and actually making the system work, that's an American dream for people who've been locked out of it.
Crenshaw also tells the final report that the way the media covered the trial encouraged an us versus them view of the case.
It invited people to be spectators rooting for Team A or Team B. Then the verdict happens and people do what they do when their team wins or loses. One team cheers, the other one's upset.
Why did the defense want to bring race front and center in the trial? Attorneys wanted to capitalize on LA's long history of racial conflict and police brutality, going back decades. August 1965. The nearly all-black neighborhood of Watts exploded in violence after residents believed white officers unfairly targeted a black motorist during a traffic stop. In 1988, the department was accused of racial profiling. It listed half of all black males in Los Angeles, aged 21 to 24, as gang members. In 1992, rioting broke out again, following the acquittal of white police officers in the beating of Rodney King.
It's perfectly rational to talk about race in Los Angeles in a police case. It would have been malpractice not to talk about race.
Writer Jeffrey Toobin tells the final report that this defense strategy raised ethical issues.
What are the obligations of a defense attorney? Do you have an obligation to the community not to stir it up, not to use deep historical resentments in service for your client? Those are hard questions.
The legal legacy and the effect the Simpson case had on race relations continues to be debated more than a decade after the verdict. In the final report, the 252-day jury trial was the longest ever in California. Simpson's legal fees are estimated at $10 million, while the trial cost LA County taxpayers $9 million. The case also served as a launching pad for a new breed of reporters.
You now have a whole industry of TV legal pundits, attorneys who know nothing about the particular case, who are 3,000 miles away. It tends to trivialize the significance of what's occurring and generates this message that criminal trials are purely entertainment.
Since the Simpson case, investigators have changed the way evidence is handled. Forensic labs standardize collection, processing, and storage procedures for DNA testing. California criminal law also changed after the Simpson case. During the trial, Nicole Brown Simpson's diary and the statements she'd made about her history of abuse were ruled inadmissible. 11 months after the verdict, California enacted a law that allowed this kind of evidence to be admitted in future trials. Christopher Darden left the district attorney's office in 1995. 2 years later, so did Marcia Clark. In 2002, Johnny Cochran retired from trying criminal cases, and 3 years later, died of an inoperable brain tumor. On the day of his acquittal, Simpson's legal team and his family held a press conference. Simpson's son read a statement written by his father.
I will pursue, as my primary goal in life, the killer or killers who slaughtered Nicole and Mr. Goldman.
After the trial, Simpson claimed that private investigators and volunteers were following up on leads and searching for new evidence in the case. In 2004, however, Simpson said he had stopped the search. He cited a desire to focus on raising his children. In May 1995, the family of victim Ronald Goldman filed a civil suit against Simpson. The Brown family did the same a month later. Civil trials have a lower standard of proof than criminal trials. On February 4th, 1997, a predominantly white jury in Santa Monica found Simpson liable for the death of Ronald Goldman. It also found he committed battery against Nicole Brown Simpson that resulted in her death. The civil trial featured evidence that hadn't been introduced in the murder trial, including photographs of Simpson wearing shoes that matched prints found at the crime scene. Simpson was ordered to pay $33.5 million, but he hasn't made a payment. California law protects his $25,000 a month NFL pension. Simpson lives in Florida, where state law protects his home from being seized to pay debts.
I think African Americans ended up expending a lot of political capital on O.J. And it hasn't changed O.J.'s life or orientation at all.
He didn't like all of a sudden, become, obligated to the black community.
Since the trial, Simpson has had several brushes with the law. In 2001, he was found not guilty of battery and auto burglary charges by a Florida jury.
Some people say, oh, you know, O.J.'s really suffering. O.J. plays golf every day, he lives in Florida, he's got his pension. He's doing fine. True, he's not the beloved celebrity anymore, but so what?
In 1998, Simpson discussed the murder with Esquire magazine. He said, quote, "Even if I did do this, it would have been because I loved her very much, right?" In November 2006, a book by Simpson and a TV special detailing how Simpson would have committed the murders if he were guilty were canceled due to public outrage.